Pleasure to welcome you all to day one of our 2022 Iowa Arts Summit. As our team looked over the list of registrants this week, nearly 300 of them, we look out this morning and see who is in attendance with us for our opening session. We're thrilled to see such a dynamic group of arts leaders from across the state, people who are actively working every day to make, champion, teach, and showcase the arts in their community. As you know, we're doing things a little bit differently this year, with 2 mornings of online sessions today and tomorrow, followed by our traditional in-person conference at Mainframe Studios in Des Moines on Friday. For those of you who have attended previous art summits, you'll remember that seeing old colleagues and meeting new ones is always one of the best parts. While we hope that you can join us for all 3 days of our summit, we're grateful for the time that you have taken out of your busy schedule today to learn, connect, and share your ideas. And we're excited to build momentum together around this year's summit theme of strengthening support for artists and creatives and the vital roles that all of us play in making Iowa a place where arts, culture, and creativity thrive. This morning, you'll hear from 2 distinguished and distinctive voices in our field, Pam Breaux and Tori Allen. Pam and Tori have a clear voice and strong leadership, and have shown that as our field has weathered the turbulence of the last 2.5 years in the pandemic, and both have an inspiring vision for the future. Today's sessions and tomorrow's are designed to set the tone for our conference and add the voices of arts leaders outside of our state, leaders with a unique perspective on the arts in America today, and with deep experience and insights to what works when we talk about what it takes to build a career, cultivate creativity in communities, or successfully advocate for the arts. Before I introduce our first speaker, we have a few virtual housekeeping items to share this morning. First of all, since you're with us, that means that you have successfully accessed Hopin and joined this session. So good job so far. We are still learning our new event conference platform with you. Secondly, we're excited to host this year's event on Hopin, as it offers greater networking and video conferencing capabilities. To that end, after this morning's presentation, we encourage you to check out the networking tools by using the People section on the menu that's on the left-hand side of your screen near the Stage button. Please note, if you click out of the Stage button right now, you will exit the session. So we encourage you to check out the People and other tabs after this morning's presentation. You can also click later into the reception area to view the overall conference schedule, sponsors, and speakers. And you can click on the stage, as you are now, to return to a live session. Third, ASL will be available throughout our virtual sessions and will be on screen as it is now during our speaking segments. Thank you for joining us this morning, Peggy. Fourth, live closed captioning is also available via stream text. The link is already in the chat. And then finally, all virtual sessions are being recorded. The recordings will be available starting on Monday, August 15th, and will be able to continue to access them until September 25th through Hopin. And we'll send further details out about that in the post-event email. Now, please put all questions and comments into the stage chat. And one thing our team wants to clarify is that there is an events chat and a stage chat. If you want to dialogue about the session today and submit questions for our speakers, you will want to use the stage chat. Our team will be monitoring those questions as they come in, and we'll share a few of them with Pam and Tori. The event chat can be used later to communicate with all the attendees in the conference today. So, without further delay, I'd like to introduce our first speaker this morning. Pam Breaux is President and CEO of our nation's Arts Service Organization for State Arts Councils, the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies, a role she has held since 2015. Pam has held leadership positions at the local, state, and national levels. While in the Louisiana state government, she served as secretary of the Louisiana Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism, and as executive director of the Louisiana Division of the Arts. During her time in Baton Rouge, Pam developed and led Louisiana's Cultural Economy Initiative and spearheaded the successful inscription of Poverty Point State Historic Site, an ancient Indian site as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And I think that's a really amazing accomplishment, Pam. Before working with state governments, Pam was the executive director of the Arts and Humanities Council of Southwest Louisiana and managed their decentralized arts funding program. So if I may editorialize, Pam is one of the rare leaders that has led at a local, state, and now national level, which I think really gives her a unique perspective that all of you will benefit from today. At NASA, Pam works to advance the organization's policy and programmatic mission to strengthen America's 56 state and jurisdictional arts agencies. She's a native of Lafayette, Louisiana, and has served on the boards of the U.S. Travel Association, South Arts, and the Louisiana Board of International Commerce. Pam, welcome to Iowa.
Thank you. Thanks so much, David. Hello, everyone. I am very happy to meet you all here at the Iowa Arts Summit. Thanks so much to the good folks at the Iowa Arts Council and the Department of Cultural Affairs for inviting me to join you today. Especially, I'd like to thank David Schmitz and Chris Kramer, not only for the invitation, but for your leadership of Iowa's creative community. And it's a special treat for me to be here with Tori Allen of Arts Midwest. So I offer, just to get us started, I offer each of you much gratitude for the work that you're doing each day to bring the arts alive and to bring the arts to communities across Iowa. I hope to share a perspective and some ideas to help you consider how you might deepen connections and opportunities between the arts and community. You know, I know you can deepen how the arts benefit your community and how community members can join you in building your creative community. This work is a journey, and I'm sure you're already on that journey. And I hope I can help with that a little bit. So I'd like to start with the arts and economic development. You know, we all know that there are many ways the arts benefit folks, right? And I'll touch on some of those other ways and community connections shortly. But I'd like to begin with, you know, the all-important economy. And also because Iowa has many small cities and towns, as well as rural communities, I'd like to think about the arts and economic development in a way that considers the specific challenges smaller communities face. Economically speaking, we know that rural areas have recovered more slowly than metropolitan areas from the last recession. In fact, some of them had yet to recover economically from where they were in 2009. And now here we are in the midst of trying to figure out whether we're actually in another recession. You know, and certainly outmigration is another issue so many of our smaller communities face, right? About a quarter of all US counties are losing population, and too many of them are rural or smaller cities. And we know the results of population loss, right? It's a big issue because it can cause a workforce brain drain, an erosion of tax bases, and certainly a reluctance for businesses to invest their capital in smaller cities and towns. You know, we know these problems are considerable, and we know that the arts alone can't solve them. But the arts have a lot to add to the equation and should be a part of economic development and economic recovery. And these are important considerations as we continue to center the arts within a community context. You know, we also know that the arts are particularly helpful to small communities and rural communities, and we have real proof of that. The National Endowment for the Arts helped us gather that proof, and they analyzed data to measure the impact of the arts and designs on small places, on rural counties, and it came to some important conclusions. It's some conclusions that surprised policymakers, and these are conclusions that a lot of us in the arts shook our heads to because they really, really resonated. Rural communities with design-driven businesses, for example, recovered more quickly from the last recession. Rural counties with performing arts organizations report higher household incomes, like at least $6,000 higher than those that lack performing arts organizations. And rural counties with a strong presence of arts organizations had 3 times the positive population growth than other counties did. And 2 out of 3 rural business establishments said that having the arts in the community are really important to helping them attract and retain workers. So we know that's the case in rural communities, in small towns, and in larger cities across the country. And so when we talk with policymakers, especially from this vantage point of trying to connect with them toward developing creative communities and creating better opportunities for creatives and communities, it's important to help them see through this lens, right? Because it's evidence-based. And so what I'd like to do to begin is just cherry pick a very few policy recommendations that we often suggest both local and state communities consider when they position themselves to support the arts and benefit their communities by that art support. And there's a reason I'm sharing quick policy recommendations with you, specifically related to creative communities. It's because policy change can help to create systems of support and a supportive environment for the arts and creative communities to thrive. And so, beyond thinking about great arts projects, which are always important and always exciting, I'm also encouraging us to think about ways we can promote systems change because it can help more projects thrive in the future. So, for example, when talking with state level policymakers, we at NASA have encouraged them to think about things like facilitating more strategy partnerships and joint planning between the arts and economic development. You know, this is an idea and it can be a mandate included in regulations. So, for instance, giving your local arts agency a seat at the table in economic development planning, right, and cultural development planning, community development planning pays dividends for local communities. And for the arts, when you're a part of the plan, right, you're part of the planning, then you're a part of the plan, then you can be a part of the investment strategy to activate that plan, and that can pay forward for the arts. You know, we've also encouraged policies that build a talent pipeline for communities by equipping your workforce with creative skills. You know, we know that creativity is a muscle, right? In the arts, creativity is a muscle, and the arts are its gym. So if you double down on arts education programs, for example, then you're building that pathway to an innovative and creative workforce for communities of all sizes. And this can be ensconced in policy, right? So we also encourage policies that capitalize on existing local cultural assets, right? Start with what you have and build from there. Communities large and small often have assets that they don't even see as assets. Everything from vacant buildings to creative people making wonderful things at home. Looking at your community with fresh eyes can open opportunities for real potential. And the reason it's so important to think about assets that already exist and what already exists that can be perceived and leveraged as an asset is that that's attractive to policymakers to work from assets that already exist. Just one more policy recommendation. Communities can also empower partnerships to create an environment that supports creative pursuits, like public and private entities coming together to create affordable workspaces for the arts. You know, this helps keep creative people in their communities and attract new creatives as well. You know, often when we talk about the challenges small communities face, we work from a place of what's wrong, as opposed to working from a place of what's right about our country's communities. When we focus on what we have, we can better envision capitalizing on what we have, as opposed to a focus that too deeply is ensconced in what we lack. And so Let's tour a few projects to make these ideas come alive. And I'll start with the Matic Opera House in Matic, North Dakota. It is a stellar example of this. The historic Matic Opera House was renovated to become the new hub in its community. Notice I said hub, I didn't say cultural hub, right? And the impact of this hub is substantial, and I'll explain how. The Maddox Opera House is enriching its community of, incidentally, only 500 people through outreach, restoration, historic preservation, entertainment, and the arts. And it's all centered around the Harriman Building. It's an old building constructed in 1905. It's located on Main Street. So many communities have similar properties. It was originally a mercantile store, and the second floor was known as the Matic Opera House. So a group of citizens united to visualize a dream to renovate the building came together, and it took them a few years. It definitely did, but they did just that. And now it's a well-used, multifunctional space that's really the heart of this community. And so the Harriman's Coffee House is there. It's quite a little gem operated by dedicated volunteers, and patrons enjoy coffee and drinks and home-baked goods, right? It's a much-needed gathering place for community. In that same building, their community library is also there. The library offers weekly story time, book club, and community speakers and authors. Public Wi-Fi is available there. Hugely important in rural areas where adequate internet service isn't consistently guaranteed, right? There's a meeting room there. They use it for birthdays and meetings and dinners with friends. There's a restaurant in this space. And of course, on the second floor is the restored opera house. And so the opera house ballroom is used for musicals, theater, dessert theater, concerts, meetings, reunions. In fact, right now they're teed up for a few more events. Next month is the big tribute to the legacy of Elvis Presley. In October is a haunted house, as well there should be in October. November finds a gospel brunch, and December light the night event. So I'm sure you can already feel how important this opera house is to Matic. They have developed creative community infrastructure, and they've done it through the rehabilitation of one building. And that's just one public-private example of great work happening all across the country to build and advance creative communities. So in Colorado, for example, a Creative Districts program is helping local communities step up to the plate, helping them to really, again, see their assets anew, value their creative assets, and chart a course toward greater creative vitality. And so here's how one of their communities is stepping up to the plate, and it's Trinidad, Colorado. Trinidad has a population of about 8,000 people, so 8,000, and they launched their own creative district. Their aim is to support artists and entrepreneurs through creative initiatives that economically benefit the artist and the community. One tangible example is that they're building affordable housing for artists. They're also focused on promoting galleries, performance venues, and museums that help to tell their stories. And so now the creatives and the broader community are responding by engaging in more activity than ever. And that activity has an economic impact. So as a result, annual commercial building investments went from $1.2 million a year to $37 million a year. Lodging tax collections for tourism went from $150,000 a year to over $550,000 a year. And their vacancy rates, right? Those vacant buildings on their main street, the vacancy rates were high. They went from 63% down to 13%. So that means, fewer vacant buildings means more stuff happening and more gainful commerce. And so when policymakers, right, when elected officials experience this kind of vitality, the arts contribute to communities, they want more, right? They want to engage and connect, and they want to support it because it's actually moving the needle. So I also like to share a little bit closer to home, a small arts and tourism partnership reaping nice rewards. The three small communities in Indiana came together to create the Rural Routes to Main Street Cultural Trail. They've established a self-directed driving tour of more than 40 artisan spaces in the three rural counties just west of Indianapolis. And now that tour is the generator of cultural tourism in the region. So the reasons three tourism agencies, right, one from each county, they continue to promote the trail. And what's the trail doing for the artisans? It's driving businesses to their spaces. So the idea is fueling an important part of the support system, right, for artists there and in other areas. I'll do another example from a different region of the country, from the South. Uh, so this example is from Paducah, Kentucky, and it's the Paducah Artist Relocation Program, and it involves city government. So Paducah is a city of about 25,000 in a rural area of the state, and they revitalized their downtown by selling abandoned properties for artists for next to nothing, and provided financial subsidies to help interested artists jumpstart their renovation costs. And again, this is part of the support system there to keep creatives in a place and attract new creatives to the place. The program became a national model for arts-based economic development, artists benefit, and the city itself, city government, has achieved a 10-to-1 return on its investment in the program. It's also important that programs like these commit to artist-friendly strategies, which don't price artists out of the market, that they were central to building, right? They built that market. And so there need to be protections in place to ensure their gainful continuance in these revitalized communities. So as I mentioned earlier, certainly the arts contribute in all sorts of ways. The economy is only one of those ways. We all know that. There are tangible and intangible benefits of the arts, and they're immense and deserve our attention. And they're also really important to creative community considerations. So, what I'd like to do is turn toward some of the more intangible through the lens of the pandemic. So, here we all are, about 2.5 years later in this pandemic, right? Trying to navigate our lives and work through what we hope is the other side, right? The downside of the pandemic. And after far too much loss and heartbreak and inequities laid bare, the political divide, the economic strife, I mean, it's wearying, right? We're understandably weary. And in some fundamentally important ways, I want to point out that the arts helped get Americans and, frankly, folks across the world through the pandemic. So, for a few moments, let's reflect on what we should remember about the arts from the pandemic era. I believe that many of us, from outside and from inside the arts community, experienced what the arts do powerfully for communities. And maybe some folks don't realize it. The pandemic, for those of us in the arts, I think, the pandemic brought it into sharper focus. There are hundreds and possibly thousands of examples of what the arts did for society as we all face the pandemic. Artists mobilized to help create healthy communities. We saw strategic partnerships between artists and public health professionals. Artists help encourage vaccinations. Art installation sites were pop-up vaccine events. Art helped all of us manage isolation, right? Artists and arts organizations swapped physical performance spaces for virtual ones and found creative ways to keep people connected while we were also distraught from being kept physically apart. You may even recall some examples, right? They were everywhere online, locally and worldwide. Quarantine art clubs emerged virtually. Singers came together to stream and record amazing music that connected us to each other. We saw deeply moving live streamed concerts in theater, providing hope and helping us cope during dark days. And the beautiful proof that this was resonating was manifested as individuals and families across America, they joined in and they produced and uploaded their own performances. There were some really memorable ones. I could recall families online producing great renditions of their favorite songs from musicals. It was life affirming when we needed it. And beyond battling isolation, art also fueled social change, as it has always done so effectively across the ages. Arts workers did all this and more, and a lot more for communities, while artists, culture bearers, and arts organizations themselves were also suffering from the full force and effects of the pandemic. Art delivered the cathartic experiences our country needed these past 2 years, helped us express the experience of isolation and loneliness, and certainly helped to connect us to each other when we felt disconnected. Whether it was through themes of hope or fun or creative activities, helping us cope with uncertain times was really, really critical. And in many ways, the arts helped us lift up our better angels in response to social crises. I share this to suggest that what the arts do for communities is incredibly powerful. It's critical and it's irreplaceable. Communities need the arts in profound ways. The pandemic demonstrated this for us, and the arts community should absolutely own this. We should own it. Communities fundamentally and to their core need the arts, and the arts respond in profound ways. And so, as arts patrons and workers and lovers, as we build ideas and partnerships for moving creative communities forward in a post pandemic world, I encourage you to take ownership of this important lesson along with you. That's especially meaningful to me when I think about recovery from the pandemic, because the arts are aiding in our recovery as human beings connected to each other, as well as to our economic recovery. As you may have gathered from David's intro of me, I'm from Louisiana. And as a Louisianian, for about 14 years, I worked in state government. So I was there as state government responded to the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. And the story of New Orleans' social recovery from the hurricane is as important as the economic one. In the first weeks and months following Katrina, as folks began working to rebuild, neighborhoods felt really isolated, not unlike the pandemic, right? And many streets populated by only a couple of houses. As people returned to largely empty neighborhoods to again begin their rebuilding, it was music that literally helped them find their neighbors, physically and literally. Music on front porches paved the way for reconnection. And at the same time, it provided moments of joy and hope during recovery that took all too long. There are so many stories about how New Orleans' traditional culture and its many art forms reconnected people and provided solace. I don't think a place can recover without the arts. And I really see the synergies between that experience and this pandemic as well. On the economic side related to Katrina, we witnessed firsthand the powerful synergies between the arts and economic recovery. We saw that supporting the cultural economy's comeback provided opportunities for the arts to then support the recovery of the other sectors. And there is no more important example than our post Katrina investments to bring back the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival. We stood the festival back up, we invested in it, and we promoted it. And it helped reopen restaurants, fill hotels, bring shoppers to merchants. In many respects, the festival reopened the city and brought back residents and tourists alike. And these kinds of benefits, they're not unique to New Orleans and Louisiana. The arts have catalyzed recoveries before, right? Have catalyzed recovery, resilience, and revitalization. And case studies prove this. And so we should be thinking about this where the pandemic recovery is concerned. To rebound from an economic catastrophe of this magnitude, state and local governments have to be inventive and entrepreneurial. They need solutions for communities large and small, right? They have the chance to really reseed the scorched earth left behind by COVID-19. And they can do that with the arts and more, right? The arts are helping with these issues and create these opportunities. And with more increased partnerships and resources for the arts, we could do more. And so that's another reality I think we should own as we consider our work in communities in this post-pandemic moment. We are an important part of community comeback, and we shouldn't be shy about claiming that. So, as our country tries to turn the corner on the pandemic, we're seeing the arts helping to fortify communities across the country. We know those investments are critical. They're happening. They probably need to happen more. Of course, they do, uh, because they're good not only for the arts, they're critical for the arts, but then they help the arts stand up other parts of the economy, like in New Orleans. This is powerful, and this is an economic message that I think is important to carry forward. The pandemic has been tough for all of us, right? Lots of pivoting, lots of adapting, the need to be resilient was exhausting, right? The need to persevere. But I want to share with you that in addition to the fact that we're surviving it, right? And we're surviving it. I personally think we've also been uh, active in building muscle through the ways we've survived this past couple of years. We've been building muscle for persevering. We've been building our muscle for managing change. We've been building our muscle for working in new ways and creating new partnerships. So we've endured a lot, but in that endurance, we've built new muscle that we can use to adapt to our next normal, right? To manage great change and to persevere in the face of incredible challenges. So I would encourage you to own that muscle and consider what you might do with it next, right? You might use it in meaningful service to communities. You might use it to further integrate the arts across communities. So, as you consider this theme at the Arts Summit of creative communities, think about what it would take for your creative community to soar. Soar, that's SOAR, not the other one, right? What are the assets already in place that can be leveraged to advance creative practices where you live? Really explore how the arts can even more deeply be infused across community. What might infrastructure look like in your community that helps artists and organizations? Might it look like the Matic Opera House, right, in North Dakota, where one facility in a very tiny town became the center of community life, and centered within it, you find the arts, right, alive and being supported? Might it look like affordable artist housing and the promotion of galleries and performance spaces and museums, like in Trinidad, Colorado? Or the Cultural Tourism Partnership, right, in Indiana, where small communities come together and they're continuing to promote 40 artisans. Whether it's a local Percent for Art program that dedicates funding for art in public buildings, or a cultural districts program, or local planning initiatives that bring artists to the table, these all create systemic opportunities to center the arts, right? To center support of the arts and center support of creative people in a community. So whether the model you prefer focuses on affordable places for artists to live and work, or public marketplaces that feature treasures from both farmers and artists, or all of the above, right? Working cooperatively in communities with leaders and with the local doers. We all know who the doers are in our communities. And working with them, as well as elected officials, can chart the course for supporting a creative community that benefits artists and arts organizations. And in return, the arts always, tangibly and intangibly, benefit the community. So I'm excited that your agenda includes these ideas for the next couple of days. And I'm grateful for your time and attention this morning, and looking forward to the chat.
Well, Pam, let me be the first to say thank you so much for that really inspiring and also deeply practical message this morning. That's what I'm really struck by. I know somebody messaged me midway through your talk and said 20 minutes in, and I've already taken so many notes. And we also received a couple of questions. Will some of those examples you shared be shared out? We will share those out probably in the post-attendee email So look for some links to those examples that Pam mentioned. I think what we're going to go ahead and do, Pam, is go ahead and introduce our next speaker, Tori Allen. I would invite those who have questions for Pam to go ahead and submit those in the chat, and we'll hopefully have time here at the end for questions for both of our guest speakers this morning. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Tori Allen, who was with us here in Iowa just a short time ago in June, visiting with the Arts Midwest Board. And Tori, it's great to have you back this morning as well.
Good to be here, David. Thank you.
Thank you, Tori. And I have to embarrass you with your bio here. So here we go. Tori Allen has more than 30 years of wide-ranging experience in national, regional, and local arts leadership, including executive and artistic management, fundraising, marketing, and international performance. Tori has been a keynote speaker for international, national, and regional conferences, and a guest lecturer at the University of Pennsylvania, Yale, University of Michigan, University of Minnesota, and other schools. Tori has been involved with the National Endowment for the Arts, the Wallace Foundation, and currently serves as board chair of National Arts Strategies. In 2019, he became the new president and CEO of Arts Midwest, our regional arts organization. From 2016 to 19, he presided over philanthropic activity at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival and was chief officer in development of marketing at Alaska Public Media and executive and artistic director of Anchorage Opera, which I think is the most fascinating part of your CV and experience story. So I'm going to shorten it there. Both of our speakers this morning have so many accomplishments to share. But Tori, welcome to Iowa here virtually this morning, and it's good to be with you.
Thank you, David. It's great to be here. Just thanks to you and Chris. I have so much respect for your deep and sincere commitment to the arts and the health and the well-being of Iowa. As one of our nation's most vibrant art states, Iowa has held a special place in my heart for nearly 20 years, extending back to the days when I led the National Patrons Council for Americans for the Arts. And also big kudos to Pam. Pam, I just felt so much of what you were saying was resonating with me and resonates with the direction that Arts Midwest is going. It's as if we must share some DNA or something like that. So just great. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I thought I'd approach this time with you by sharing my undergirding belief about the arts and creativity. And that is, I believe creativity is one of the most powerful spirits our species can access. And the arts is one of the best ways to help folks tap into and nurture that spirit. I believe creativity is the Holy Grail. And the quest I've set for myself in Arts Midwest is helping communities as well as individuals access the Grail. Now, before you begin to think that I'm a little crazy or wonder about my sanity, I'd like to add some context here. I've always been intrigued with the concept of the Holy Grail, this centuries-long quest for a miraculous chalice with the power to heal wounds and provide immeasurable sustenance, joy, and vitality. I've lived with this fascination since I was a child. A few years ago, I started asking myself this question. What if the Grail isn't a physical object? What if it's a state of being? What if it's not a chalice, but a level of awareness? And what if every human and community on this planet has the Grail nested within them already? What if it's already pre-coded in our DNA? And finding the Grail is more about intensifying the exploration within as opposed to hunting around the world for some object outside of ourselves. Just imagine the kinds of positive transformations that could happen when we develop a system or systems to properly acknowledge and nurture the Grail within ourselves and our communities. I just believe the possibilities are huge. And I so strongly believe this that this is how we are constructing the future of Arts Midwest. We're constructing the future that is built on this premise, and I call it the Grail Quest. The Grail Quest. The goal is to do everything possible through our means to lift the gaze of every individual and community across the Midwest to help them see the power within themselves. And when I speak about this, I'm reminded of the blanket toss in Alaska Native culture. I observed this event several times during my decade of living in Alaska. This came to mind earlier when Pam talked about soaring, helping these folks to soar. Well, the Alaska Native Blanket Toss is a favorite event during Alaskan whaling festivals. In the blanket toss, the community comes together to see how high they can pop a person into the sky from a blanket made of walrus hides. While it's now part of the fun and games of the festival, originally it was about the community coming together to help folks see further, popping them up or elevating them so they could see beyond the immediate horizon to hunt game. Now imagine committing to our own variation of the blanket toss with our communities, helping individuals and groups to see more, to see further, helping them to see the arts as one of the most important keys to the Grail. Just imagine. And here's the thing, the key is the arts, but the treasure is much, much bigger. The treasure is the kind of thing that Pam was speaking about. It's the knowledge that what's already inside us and in our communities, our natural assets, is greater than we can comprehend. Can you imagine the kinds of personal explorations this could spark and what kinds of community based explorations this kind of thinking could spark? Now, just um, as I think about this, imagining all of this is fine and dandy, but like Pam said, we need something more concrete. And so you may be wondering about practical applications. How do we turn this whimsical thinking into action? And how do we embrace joy, the joy and power of the Alaskan blanket tossing in this space? I can tell you a little bit about how Arts Midwest is approaching this journey of converting this whimsical thinking into practical stuff. For the last couple of years, we've been working our way through uh, an organizational shifting process to help us articulate a new vision and activate new directions. The overarching strategy involves curatorial visioning, case concepting, brand exploration, impact assessments, and strategic planning. And we go public with this later this fall, with this new vision and focus areas that will inform all our activity. Our new vision will be that Midwestern creativity powers thriving, entrepreneurial, and welcoming communities. Midwestern creativity powers thriving, entrepreneurial, and welcoming communities. And our focus areas will be support, inform, and celebrate. Support, inform, and celebrate. With this vision, we will be striving to find and understand our place in the arts service ecosystem in the Midwest and beyond, to develop closer relations with the states, with groups like NASA, with the Native nations, with local arts agencies, with advocacy folks, and other regional and national service arts organizations, including National Arts Strategies and the Intercultural Leadership Institute, Americans for the Arts, the AIR Collaborative, Art Spaces, FEMA, the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Transportation, and so on, in support of this space. Um, we want to continue in the support space. We want to continue our grant making partnerships with the NEA and other national funders. The shift in this space and support will be figuring out how to strategically organize and integrate our suite of offerings with others to foster greater cooperation while decreasing unnecessary duplication and programmatic inefficiency. The big goal is to point all of the work toward community prosperity as much as possible, point all of everything that we're doing towards community prosperity. And in the informed space, we hope to go further in providing free and low cost access to the very best thinking in arts leadership. Everything from going beyond land acknowledgments to learning and truly understanding nonprofit financials. And the final area, focus area, which is totally new for us, will be the final focus area, which is totally new for us, will be celebrate. We believe this can be achieved through simple storytelling that is ongoing, consistent, well organized, and broadly distributed. Perhaps the best way to explain what I mean is to talk about the transitioning work at Arts Midwest. For years, we produced well prepared, thoughtful stories about the arts, and those stories skewed towards audiences inclined to reading longer pieces, quasi academic audiences. Of the 750,000 to nearly 1 million folks our programs touched each year, this meant that the audience for our storytelling was relatively small, a few hundred folks at most. And of those few hundred folks, probably less than 50 people were actually reading our materials. And most of those 50 represent the already converted. They already see the bigger picture. And this is not uncommon in our sector. Our storytelling focuses on niche and sector-specific audiences, funders, patrons, sometimes elected officials, special cohorts. And that's all nice and well-intentioned, but I believe we need to start creating content for many, many more folks. We need to make the design and implementation of expansive communication strategies one of our top priorities. Let's tell the stories about the economic advantages of a well-supported arts sector. Let's tell folks about the power of creativity in non-art sectors, the power of creativity in civil community building, in community safety, community design, in health and wellness, in engineering, in finance, in economic development, in tourism, in treating PTSD, in aging, education, recreation, equity, access, cross-cultural relations, and navigating life in general. We're going to use the power of multiple platforms to tell the stories that will aim to make the arts something all folks can love and understand. And at Arts Midwest, we're going to work to get more folks on that tossing blanket, more folks to soar by providing more stories that are more relatable to more people, stories that will bounce more people into expansive viewing and understanding of the power of the arts, more people to soar. We'll be doing this in partnership with arts and cultural organizations in Iowa and all across the Midwest and the nation. We will partner with print media, broadcast media, social media, educational media, and beyond to create, capture, and distribute stories that pop the public consciousness high enough to see the arts as the key to the Grail. Can you just imagine how fun we're all going, the kind of fun we're going to have, and the difference this work is going to make? And just like the native Alaskans who come together for the blanket toss, we must all come together in community as a unified force, not disorganized siloed colonies, but united collectives, each holding our part of the blanket in harmony with our neighbors, with aligned energies that yield maximum lift, a united force that easily bounces more folks high enough to see further. Unlike the Alaska Natives, we must all join together in this effort, energizing our variation of the tossing blanket with the goal of magnifying and celebrating the power of the arts in Iowa and across the Midwest. I believe we can do this. We can embrace the Alaskan blanket toss to toss as a way to direct people and communities on the quest for the Grail. And the Grail as not being a physical object, but the Grail as an awareness and an awakening of the power of creativity and the power of the arts as one of the primary keys to creativity. If we all unite in this quest, I believe our personal and collective selves can achieve unimaginably brilliant transformation. The Grail, for me, the Grail isn't a myth. It's real and it's within our grasp. This is the quest I have committed to, and this is the quest that Arts Midwest is committed to, and this is the quest I invite you to join. And then with that, I pass it on back to David.
Wow. Well, Tori, what a, again, inspiring message to complement Pam's this morning. I, like everybody watching, there's some very quotable phrases you have used and that Pam used that I'm going to be continuing to ruminate on for a while. And what I want to do at this point, looking at our time and some of the questions that have come in, I want to bring you both into the conversation now. And so the first question I'm going to ask is for both of you. And whoever wants to chime in first, feel free to do so. One of the themes that I think is a through line in both of your presentations this morning is really this idea of making space for, as Tori, you were just saying, more voices, more stories, more storytelling. And Pam, as I think you were highlighting a little bit more from a community building perspective, more communities, more resilient infrastructure that supports artists and creatives, more systems of support that are broad-based. And so this theme of making space, that really seems to me to be what our great challenge and our mandate is right now as a field, is to make space, to share resources, and really at the end of the day to share power among a lot of different types of arts, cultural, and creative organizations, and so that more communities can rise and succeed in our field. And so, Tori, you come from a philanthropy background, and I know for those who have listened to the Filling the Well podcast that Arts Midwest does, you recently had a podcast session on this exact idea of resource sharing and how that can be accomplished through a philanthropic lens. So, same question for both of you. How do you see this moment moving forward in terms of putting into place more practices that can really bring about broad-based support, especially for artists, creatives, and small community-based organizations?
There's a big question.
I know.
Yeah, I think that I'll start from a funder vantage point. I think that funders, both private funders and public funders of the arts, I think we have all learned a great deal during the pandemic about how we can adapt our practices to meet a different day. And we saw funders on both sides, public and private, adapt greatly to the benefit of arts communities. So I think one of the things we'll see in the sector is public and private funders looking to see how some of these newer adaptations can move forward to provide greater resources and more equitable resources across the arts community, right? I'll quote our chair of the National Endowment for the Arts. I like when she talks about snapping back and how we should actually be thoughtful coming out of the pandemic about not snapping back to previous practices that weren't the most productive, right? But how we might learn from the experiences and the adaptations we made toward a future that is more sustainable, more equitable, more productive for the arts communities we all serve. So I think we'll see some real changes in a very positive way coming from funders across the arts space. So that's one of the ways.
Agreed. I think this new way of thinking is encouraging greater collaboration. In my observation, one of the things that our field has struggled with is the sense of scarcity. But I think as we embrace these new ideas and a bigger vision, there's plenty of room for everyone. There's no need to be in this place with a scarcity mentality, and so we can all find our place within the ecosystem and support each other. Think of the ecosystem as this big walrus blanket. Like we all have our space, and we can all pop ourselves up and make a difference. But it's as simple as united we stand, divided we fall, and we just have to kind of guard against siloing and siloing in how we intersect with groups outside of the arts. Like we must begin to bring all of these different folks to this walrus hide, and I think we just have to embrace a much bigger approach to how we show up as organizations, individuals. It's all got to be grounded in community.
Well, thank you both. I'm now going to turn to a question from an attendee. And the question is for Pam and Tori, perhaps you'll want to chime in as well. The question, Pam, is when you were providing some examples of communities that have developed programs supporting artists specifically, and Paducah, Kentucky was one of those you mentioned. The question really is, in a lot of other situations still, though, artists are mainly still asked sometimes to provide their services for free or low cost, not still being valued for their time and work, which is the topic of our next session this morning. But how do you see, kind of on both the policy side as well as the practice side, how do you see us moving towards a place where artists are more fully valued and rewarded economically for their work?
Sure. I think that as we, as arts leaders and the arts community, as we work in collaboration with nonprofits, with corporations, with government entities, with community and across community, it's really important to stand firmly in the space where we acknowledge, right, and live that art is work, right? Art is work, and artists deserve their pay like any other worker deserves their pay. And so as we are at various tables, whether it's, you know, helping the library think about its next opportunity to renew its tax, right? Or the economic or community development table in local government. I think as we find ourselves and insert ourselves at these tables, it's really important to be consistent in the message that that these are about lives and livelihoods. Art is work, just like nursing is work and teaching is work, and we have just we've got to stand in that space firmly to help our colleagues, whether they're from government or the private sector or the nonprofit sector, be able to stand in that very same space.
Yeah, and I think just to acknowledge that as Pam mentioned, it is a journey. I think back on times when I was running the opera company in Alaska, and we had a limited budget, and we were paying the artists and the production folks pretty low wages. And now I think back that and I cringe because we could have just said, this is going to be a priority. We're going to raise this. And as difficult as it's going to be, it means that we may have to make some shifts, but we're not going to underpay these folks. And so even now, with our administrators, with staff, we're going to make sure that our wages are not low. We're going to pay people the right amount. And but that's a a big cultural shift that you have to go through with boards, with people in your world, and so it's a journey. It may take a few years, but I think we actually have to have the courage to begin to make those steps because it's the right thing to do.
I really like the journey addition to that, Tori. It just makes me think of one of the practical ways we're on that journey at NASA, for instance. And we're a small organization by DC standards, but related to the salaries of our team. We've committed as a part of the journey toward being more real, and the way that's tangible in helping to live up to the promise of appropriate wages is we've committed that every 3 years we do the research that helps us surface what the going rates for the region are in nonprofit organizations like NASA every 3 years, so that we do the research, we're transparent about it with our team, and then we work with our board to ensure our salaries are in those ranges. So I just share it as a little example because I think there are ways, big and small, across all of our organizations and in our work with individual artists that we can continue that journey.
Yes, and our service organizations, especially, I think, should feel compelled to model this. I'm just recalling just a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, at a theater, large, big, reputable theater, there were folks on the staff who had to have second jobs or who had to have partial welfare because they were being underpaid, and that was kind of deemed okay in that space, and it's not okay. So we just have to change our mindsets.
Thank you both very much for your comments on that. Shifting gears, Pam, a question that came in for you towards the end of your presentation related to kind of the asset-based community development approach you were describing. And taking away some of the local context of the question, and which is maybe a little too in-depth for today. But basically, the question is interesting, and it is, what about in communities where you see an asset, maybe it's a facility that's being utilized right now, it's not vacant or it's not underutilized, but there's maybe a higher purpose for it. Maybe it's in a cultural district or a place where it really could be a wonderful creative and cultural asset. How can you approach, in general, of course, a conversation like that with your local leadership?
Well, I started off, I think, my comments early on about asset-based versus a space of scarcity and scarcity. Scarcity, see, it's scarcity, right? And I think that the same holds true here. And so if there is a space, for instance, in a creative district that could serve additional purpose, higher purpose, entering those conversations from a place of cultural wealth and opportunity that has its potential in the arts, and what could be next or added to that space is a really important frame, right? It's a positive frame, and it's a frame that begins with what we have to offer, as opposed to what you lack within that maybe underutilized building, right? It's a frame that helps the hearer actually have their ears open and their hearts open, perhaps, and minds open to the conversation. And it's an interesting question to think about community assets, those we see and those we don't see. On the don't see side, I watched the State Arts Agency in South Carolina has a program called Art of Community Rural SC. I listened to one of the community leaders in one of those rural towns talk about how they did that. And she was a doer in the community, and she got other doers on her team. And those doers went door to door, and they discovered miracles that they had no idea existed in their community. Someone making parts for drums that were being sold around the world. And it was in a small, economically poor rural community in South Carolina. And so authenticity is big in this space of engaging in assets, whether they're seen or unseen. And they did it authentically. And for that community, it meant the doers, right, with reputations as doers, and people of goodwill. It was door to door there, and they made friends and allies, and more people got on board to improve the community through the creative district.
I've seen the same thing happen in just a couple of weeks ago. I was in northern North Dakota in an Icelandic community, a Scandinavian community that was primarily Icelandic, and experienced some incredible art by people who would never describe themselves as artists because of just the humility. And the community was coming together to save a sacred space and to convert that sacred space into a community center, a meeting center, a health center. But they were just realizing that the importance of this asset, this community asset, and they were starting to. These folks who never thought of themselves as artists were beginning to understand their importance in this effort and this work. And so this kind of transformation can happen all over. I remember a few years ago visiting. My father grew up in a steel mill town outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I went back about 3 years ago to visit. And there was this old, big, huge steel mill that no one had used. And the entire time I'm thinking, my God, if someone could just help them see what the possibilities are, it would transform this entire community. And I felt like I wish I was closer to this community, but I'm not. But there are numerous examples of that all across the country where they just don't see, they're not aware of those assets. They're not aware that the Grail is there. They can do this. If a company leaves, the town doesn't have to die. Tap into their mindset and reimagine their future.
Tori, is that the Bethlehem steel mill project?
No, this is outside of a place called Wilmerdine.
Oh,
it was
okay.
The home of the Westinghouse brake factory.
Okay. Well, I know there's just some, and Pam, you named some too, some amazing examples of taking former industrial facilities or sites and creating arts assets. And we have some good examples of that here in Iowa too. I want to try to get in one, if not two more questions while we have you with us this morning. Christine asks, and Tori, I think this was picking up on, well, really a point you just made about how many, you said the humility to describe yourself as an artist. We know there are many more people who make art and are creative, or maybe novice artists, which is the phrasing that Christine used, maybe don't see themselves yet as professional working artists. The question is, when you were talking about broadening the story and bringing those in, what types of communications or advertisements do you think would be a way to inspire that broader artistic creative community to see themselves as a full-fledged member of the arts community?
That's a big question and a
I
great
know.
question. We're wrestling with that right now.
We have big questions.
How do you help these folks who are in fact knee deep in creative energy, own and recognize that there's a huge value to what they're doing, and how do you message that to the greater public? And as I mentioned before, how do we crystallize this messaging so it isn't just for the chorus, the people that already know? How do we when you think about some of the major politicians who use some of the platforms like Twitter, and they have 100 million followers, and they have figured out how to crystallize the messaging and make impact. And so, can we study those folks and figure out how to do that? Can we have these platforms where there's this micro messaging, this crystallized messaging that hits them at the gut emotional level? This is what we need to do. Can you imagine an art service or the arts collectives having 100 million people following a design communication system that intentionally is seeking to convert these folks? Like, it would be incredible. And we can do this. It's being done now. Like, we can do this. So how do we crystallize this messaging? We're going to be doing a lot of experimenting over the next few years, but I definitely want to move away from this. It's a beautiful space of writing beautiful long form pieces about the arts and its impact, because there's some really great entities doing that work already. I want to get into hitting the masses. I want to crystallize messaging for those folks.
In one way, I can speak from the vantage point of the masses. I think, because Tori is a professionally trained artist who's worked professionally as an artist, and I have not. Right? I've had artistic training. I've had creative practice. I would say in an avocational sense. Right? I paint rocks with my nieces. Right? And for me, as someone who connects to the arts, obviously supports the arts in my work life, but I'm not a professional artist, so I get sort of that tinge of what to call myself and that little bit of a struggle. And when I think about messages that resonate for me when I'm in that space, I think about the idea of creativity, because although Tori's a professionally trained artist, everybody's got creativity. I've got creativity, and I show it off with my nieces when we rock paint, or when we look at the videos they've created on their phones, or whether we go to a museum, right? In all the ways. And for me, the creativity as a core is so inclusive, right? It's so inclusive, and more people can really connect personally, I think, to it. So for me, messaging, I don't have all of the secret sauce for you, Tori, but for me, creativity is at the core of messaging, because so many more of us can step in and participate.
Oh, I think all of us can, Pam. I completely agree. I mean, you want your doctor to be creative when you're having some medical issues. You want your accountant to be creative when you're having financial issues. Like, everyone, I mean, if you think about how often the problem is we're constantly bombarded by creativity, and we just don't acknowledge it. Like a building, a car, our clothes, we just don't acknowledge it. There's man-made creativity, or made by humans, and then there's the creativity of nature. Like, we're just enmeshed in the creative spirit. It's like when I was in North Dakota, we were talking about creativity, and we got these local folks to kind of accept that they were being creative. And a lady came up to me and she said something really beautiful. She said, creativity it's all over, it's everywhere. And she said, I believe creativity is God. And I was like, wow, that's and it just came at the right moment. And if you just think about it, it's there. It's this power. It's this force. It's omnipresent, and we need to learn to tap it more.
I am so tempted to end right there in that moment, but duty compels me to bring one last question in, because we have had some really good ones, and it's a little bit of a code switch. It's for you, Pam, and it is kind of back to real quickly talking about really your role working in local and state government. And the question is, did you see good examples, I'm streamlining the question a bit, of arts and historic commissions or bodies kind of working together to push a lot of the change you were describing? I'm gathering that the person asking the question has maybe seen some of those different local and municipal groups not rowing in the same direction as much. And have you seen that in your work at any level?
I've seen it and I've lived it, right? So at the local level, I directed an arts council that was in a gainful partnership with the local preservation society. And together we did work that counted for both preservation and the arts. And that work was embraced by the community, by the city in Southwest Louisiana, in little but mighty Lake Charles, Louisiana. So I've lived it, and I know that that is not an isolated kind of story. And at the state level, I have seen preservation communities and advocates come together with arts advocates specifically around cultural districts or creative districts, because together they can really then have the secret sauce to encourage policymakers to create incentives that really make communities and downtowns or creative corridors sing, right? Because they're coming together, and you've got the real estate side, you've got the creative side, and that together is a woven approach that I have found policymakers really appreciate, because they can see it differently than they see sort of figuring out an incentive for the arts in isolation, right? Or figuring out an incentive for preservation in isolation. Those two together are cultural development and economic development, community development, and the whole pie, right? And so, yes, I think that's gainfully happening in a number of places, but it's when the advocates can come together and realize that they have more to gain together than they do advocating separately.
Yes, I especially appreciate the last point that you made there, Pam, so much. Well, we are at 10:15 here, and I want to thank you both so much for your time this morning. I want to say also, in concluding our time with you this morning, that I really want to recommend the resources of both of your organizations, which I know your teams work so hard putting together to all of our attendees this morning. So all of you, I hope that NASA will see a flood of new subscriptions to its field notes and traffic to its website. If you are not yet visiting the National Assembly of State Arts Agency's website, I highly encourage you to. And if you enjoyed this morning Pam providing a lot of examples state by state of other efforts, you will find a trove of that type of information, as well as creative industry profiles that I know we use constantly here in Iowa to help make the case for the size, the scope, and the impact of our creative field. Similarly, I want to recommend Arts Midwest to all of you. If you're not familiar with, again, resources like the new Filling the Well podcast with inspiring stories like those Tori shared this morning, as well as its grant-making portfolio, highly encourage you to check out the Arts Midwest website. And because of our association in Iowa with Arts Midwest, our staff are also highly connected with the Arts Midwest team. And so feel free to reach out to us as well if you have questions about an Arts Midwest resource, and we can direct you to the right place there as well. So with that, Tori and Pam, thank you again so much. I wish you could hear the virtual applause this morning.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Pam.
Thank you. See you next month.
Okay. Take care.
And before the session wraps, I want to just share again from a housekeeping standpoint and next steps. This session will end. However, the Hopin event platform remains live. We intentionally built in a half-hour break before our next session, figuring that some of you may want to stretch, meditate, check email, which is the opposite, do whatever you would like to do in the next half hour. And we will see you back for our next session at 10:45 a.m. valuing creative work. Thank you again.